Who controls your brain? Surely you do. In the next 12 minutes, I invite you to listen and then decide and ask yourself, what do you want to do about it? I grew up in the 1970s in Vancouver, Canada. My immigrant parents had 8 children in 10 years. Life was chaotic and loud. I'm sure you can imagine just how challenging it might be to have your voice heard in such a large family. When I was 13 years old, I knew I wanted to be a teacher. It took me 20 years before I began to realize perhaps one of my motivating factors was that I wanted somebody to listen to me. Not such a great reason to go into this profession. Inspired by Simon Sinek's work, it took me at least another 15 years of teaching before I began to very clearly realize my why. I knew I loved learning and sharing ideas and learning from young people. My why, simply put, is to live a purposeful life so that I may inspire others to find their purpose and passion in life. 25 years in, and I was loving my craft. My students were thriving. And then I started to notice around 2015 some concerning changes in my students. I, like many of my colleagues, was feeling ill-equipped and unsure of how to help my students thrive, to help them find that love of learning that I had witnessed for decades in my classroom. So, at 53, I felt compelled to go back to school to get my master's in counseling in order to help me support my students better. This won't come as a surprise to many of you, but the shift just so happened to be very closely correlated with a sharp increase in social media use around the world. In 2015, according to Data Reportal, there were approximately 2 billion social media users around the globe. And just 9 years later, we see approximately 5 billion social media users. That is a 138% increase in just 9 years. In the classroom, this shift was marked by a decline in our students' abilities to focus, to ask questions in class, to flourish in a school environment. My master's focus was on substance use. Through experts like Dr. Gabor Mate and Brené Brown, I had been teaching and learning about the bio, psychosocial, spiritual aspects of addiction for years to my psychology students. As a teacher, I had always sensed that to establish a sense of connection in the classroom was critical for learning and for safety and belonging. And yet, the more I learned from the experts in the field, the more I recognized that this just doesn't seem to be enough. This problem, I began to realize, was systemic. So many continued to suffer and to be pulled to their devices. It was becoming commonplace for diagnoses of ADHD, anxiety, depression. If students weren't diagnosed, then we saw a languishing that Adam Grant refers to in his work, and Dr. Vivek Murthy speaks to in his bestseller on loneliness. To further exacerbate this problem, the COVID-19 disruption in face-to-face learning compounded the already growing developmental delays that we were seeing. Then, in 2023, I read Stanford psychiatrist and author's book, Dr. Anna Lembke's Dopamine Nation. This was a game changer for me. She offered an interesting theory, one that resonated with both me and my students. Dr. Lemke explained that in our dopamine-addicted world, many people in developed countries are in a constant state of dopamine deficit. She named this the plenty paradox. With our almost constant hits of 30-second TikTok videos, Amazon Prime, and Netflix binges, to name just a few, we are receiving constant hits of dopamine all day long, creating a dopamine-addicted brain. A common law of physics and of the human body and brain, what goes up must come down. As we continue to scroll, order, and watch, our brains begin to struggle with balance. So many of my students would tell me, I'll look at social media or I'll binge a series and I don't even notice the time passing. And then when I do, I feel bad, frustrated, tired. And then as my students get into the older grades and their marks begin to suffer, they tell me they feel shame. This is their brains trying to regain balance. But with the constant influx of dopamine, there's never a chance to get back to baseline. To add to this challenge, A further problem is, as Sinek explains in his famous millennial video, the important things in life, like building self-confidence, nurturing true friendships, and finding joy. There's no app for these things. They don't happen instantly. There are often long and difficult journeys of ups and downs. So decline in academic performance was only one challenge our students face. These more important developmental goals of adolescent life develop the ability to talk face-to-face, to critically reflect, to resolve conflict through discussions, simply not being practiced. Instead, filters, snaps, and Instaposts replaced true face-to-face conversation, ensuring that all we saw was a facade, a mask. Not a wonder that so many were suffering from anxiety, depression, and loneliness. You know, I often hear people from my generation say, the younger generation is lazy and entitled. This is simply not true. You are not lazy and you are not entitled. You are impatient. Your dopamine addicted brains are hardwired for instant gratification, and so you are impatient. You want everything now, and it's not your fault. You didn't create this toxic dopamine world. Our generation did, and now we have to help fix it. Thankfully, Dr. Lemke gives us somewhere to start. Abstain, maintain, and seek out pain. You know, the human brain is remarkable. If we can curb or limit our use of technology, in just 4 weeks, we can begin to rewire our brains and create new neural pathways. But we are social animals. We cannot do this alone. And so for the maintenance part of this strategy, we require systemic and social supports. We need laws to ban the use of cell phones in schools, while at the same time providing funding for access to social media-free technology so that we may prepare our students for 21st century learning, as we see in many European countries today. We, as parents, teachers, and bosses, we must learn to reconnect to each other, to show empathy, and to stop shaming our younger generation. You know, as Sinek says, we keep saying, they are our future leaders. Well, we are the leaders now. We must be accountable. We are all in this together. The third part of Dr. Anna Lemke's solution is to find healthy ways to seek out pain. Now, I know, healthy ways, what are you talking about? Why would I want to seek out pain, you say? Well, what is clear now in the science is that we must do the hard things, like exercise. As we break down the body's muscles, we rebuild them. Eat real food, not processed, so we can feed our gut biomes, our second brains. Take that ice cold plunge, or have that hard conversation so you might rebuild a broken relationship. Do that boring or hard homework now. Get that 8 hours of sleep so that you may metabolize the cortisol in your body. Have that meditation time. Practice being present on that walk with your dog without your headphones. And get out in nature and play. Now, some of these examples may not sound like fun, but what we understand now is that when we do the hard things, our brains literally begin to rewire themselves. The dopamine deficit is reversed and it flips the imbalance. In science, this is called hormetic stress. We've all felt it. We choose to get that work, and then we go out with our friends, and we can have guilt-free fun because we've done it all, and we feel great. But when we do the reverse, when we go and say, we'll do it later, we're plagued by these anxieties and that quiet negative voice in our heads, and it robs us of the pure joy of connecting with others. I close with this powerful piece of wisdom by Ojibwe author Richard Wagamese. I am constantly surrounded by noise, TV, text, the internet, music, meaningless small talk, my thinking. All of it blocks my consciousness, my ability to hear the me that exists beneath the cacophony. We can do this. We can reclaim our own brains, but we cannot do it alone. Collective action and collective care are key. You know, I often say to my students, Once you know something, you can't unknow it. I leave you with this question today. What will you do? How will you support yourself, your friends, and your family to reclaim your brains and your joy? Our very future depends upon it. Thank you.